हरिः ओम् नमः सर्वेभ्यः। अष्टाध्यायी परिचयः इत्यस्य अद्य 18 पाठः। अस्मिन् वर्गे अष्टाध्याय्याः निर्माणसमये अल्पाक्षरत्वं साधयितुं महर्षिभिः के उपायाः कृताः सन्ति तेषां संक्षेपेण अध्ययनं कुर्मः। शुक्लांबरधरं विष्णुं शशिवर्णं चतुर्भुजं प्रसन्नवदनं ध्यायेत् सर्वविघ्नोपशान्तये। येनाक्षरसमाम्नायमधिगम्य महेश्वरात् कृत्स्नं व्याकरणं प्रोक्तं तस्मै पाणिनये नमः। वाक्यकारं वररुचिं भाष्यकारं पतञ्जलिं पाणिनिं सूत्रकारं च प्रणतोऽस्मि मुनित्रयम्। अस्माकं वर्गस्य द्वे प्रयोजने अष्टाध्याय्याः आहत्य 400 सूत्राणां व्याख्यासहितम् उदाहरणसहितं च अध्ययनं तथा च अष्टाध्याय्याः प्रथमाध्यायस्य प्रथमपादस्य कण्ठस्थीकरणम्। प्रारभामहे। सूत्राणां निर्माणं कस्य तत्त्वस्य आधारेण कृतमस्ति इत्यस्मिन् विषये अस्माभिः पूर्वं काचित् चर्चा कृता वर्तते। अल्पाक्षरम् असन्दिग्धं सारवद्विश्वतोमुखम् अस्तोभम् अनवद्यं च सूत्रं सूत्रविदो विदुः इति कारिका अपि अस्माभिः तस्मिन् समये अधीता। अस्यां कारिकायां प्रथमः शब्दः अल्पाक्षरम् इत्युक्ते सूत्रनिर्माणस्य यानि कानि साधनानि ये केऽपि उपायाः महर्षिभिः प्रयुक्ताः वर्तन्ते तेषु अग्रिमः मुख्यतमः उपायः अस्ति अल्पाक्षरत्वम् इति। The most fundamental aspect that Panini Maharshi has considered while creating the sutras is alpaksharatvam. It is not whether the sutra patha is student friendly or not. It is not whether the sutra patha can be easily used for shabda sadhutvam. It is not whether the sutra should be arranged from simple sutra onwards to the difficult sutra at the end. None of these are the criteria used for the arrangement of the sutras. The most important and the only criteria, the fundamental criteria used is अल्पाक्षरत्वम। न्यूनाति न्यूनैः अक्षरैः व्याकरणस्य सर्वेपि सिद्धान्ताः कथम् उपस्थापयितुं शक्याः इति विचिन्त्य तादृशं सूत्ररचना महर्षिभिः कृता वर्तते। अतः अष्टाध्याय्याः सूत्राणि प्रकृतिप्रत्ययमेलनस्य सौलभ्यार्थं रचितानि न सन्ति, केवलम् अल्पैः अक्षरैः सर्वेषां नियमानां निर्देशार्थं रचितानि सन्ति। And this is the fundamental reason why those Prakriya Granthas like Prakriya Sarvaswam, Prakriya Kaumudi or Siddhanta Kaumudi and so on even came into existence. For a simple derivation like Ramaha, you have to go till 8th chapter of Ashtadhyayi, till Ashtamadhyaya, and only then you will be able to understand how the word Ramaha gets derived. Therefore, Prakruti Pratyaya Melanam iti मुख्यः विषयः यदि मनसि स्वीक्रियते तर्हि तत्र सूत्राणां काचित् भिन्ना रचना आधिक्येन उपयोगिनी भवति, and that rachana is what all these prakriya granthas will give. The rachana of the sutras in Ashtadhyayi is specifically by considering the alpaksharatvam in mind. And this alpaksharatvam is not only achieved by compressing the sutras and trying to use minimum letters, but there are multiple tools that Panini uses to actually achieve this reduction in the number of letters or avoiding repeated mention of something. So all these aspects which will eventually lead to alpaksharatvam are achieved by Panini Maharshi using some important tools. There are a lot of tools. I have selected only 5 most important tools. Actually, one can take series of 8-10 classes purely for explaining the techniques of alpaksharatvam. But we don't have that much time, so I have selected only 5 most important tools. So alpaksharatvartham paninina prayuktaha mukhyaha kliptyaha mukhyaha yuktayaha tingantabhavaha anubandhaha pratyayalaghavam pratyaharaha. This is what we also discussed in the previous class. And something that many of you would already know, anuvrittihi, mandukaplutihi, apakarshaha. Now, other than these, there are many other techniques, as I mentioned. In fact, संज्ञास्, परिभाषास्, निपातनम्, अधिकारः, अतिदेशः एतानि अपि अल्पाक्षरत्वस्यैव साधनानि. Again and again, if you say tarap and tam up, it will not result in the alpaksharatvam. So Panini Maharshi creates the samnya tarap tamapau ghaha, and every time he wants to mention tarap versus tarap or tamap, he will simply use the word gha instead of tarap and tamap. So that's alpaksharatvam. Similarly, paribhashas are used for alpaksharatvam. Every time when an agama is mentioned, instead of saying this is an adyavayava comes in the beginning, or this is an antya avayava comes at the end, or this comes in the middle, instead of saying all this again and again, Panini gives a paribhasha which agamas are to be considered adyavayava, which are to be considered antyavayava, and so on. Similarly, Nipatana, we have seen this, Kshaya Jaya Ushakyarthe. Instead of creating multiple sutras for one word derivation, Panini's Maharshi just gives these words as ready-made in the Nipatana Sutras. Same can be discussed for Adhikara and Atidesha. So all these are sadhanani of achieving Alpaksharatvam. We have already discussed this, so I'm going to keep this aside. Only for Adhikara, I'll talk a little bit in today's class because of the context that we are going to end up in one of these topics. But other than that, let's focus on these 5 important things that I have chosen today. Tiganta bhavaha, anubandhaha, pratyelaghavam, pratyaharaha, and anuvrittihi, manduka flutihi, and apakarshaha. So first is Tinganta bhavaha. The name is obvious. In no sutras, you will see an explicit use of Tinganta. Why? Because there is a siddhanta in the language which says sarvahi vakyam kriyaya parisamapyate. Vakye kriyavachakam padam bhavet uta na bhavet. Sarvahi vakyam kriyaya parisamapyate. So for example, somebody asks you, Kim Bhavan khadati? Are you eating? And then you just say, Yes, I am eating. So even if the answer that you have given, does not have a Kriya Pada, there is an explicit Adhyahara, aham khadami. Or a very interesting example given in the commentaries is Kuto Bhavan Patali Putrat. So there is a conversation. One person asks another, You are from where? Kuto Bhavan. The other person replies, Patali Putrat. Now, in this entire dialogue, there is no Kriyapada particularly visible. But Kuto Bhavan Agatavan, Nuchet Kuto Bhavan Vasati, and so on, an implicit Kriyapad has to be assumed over there. Why? Because unless there is a Kriyapada, a sentence cannot get a complete meaning. We say Ekating Vakyam. A Vakya must have exactly one Tinganta, one Kriyapada, and even if it is not physically present, you assume it. Tasya adhyaharaha kriyate. अतः तत्र सर्वहि वाक्यं क्रियया परिसमाप्यते इति कश्चन सिद्धान्तः वर्तते. एनं सिद्धान्तम् अनुसृत्य अष्टाध्याय्याः सूत्रेषु तिङन्तानां प्रायेण सर्वत्र अध्याहारः करणीयः. For example, we have this Savarna Samnya Sutram, Tulyasya Prayatnam Savarnam. Technically, it is Tulyasya Prayatnam Savarnam Syat. Or the Yana Sandhi Sutra, Iko Yanachi Syat. The Dvitiya Vibhakti Vidhayaka Sutra, Karmani Dvitiya Niyamyate or Karmani Dvitiya Syat. Mostly in almost all sutras, you use the Kriya Pada called Syat because these are the guidelines of the correct language. Vyakarana at the end of the day is giving the rules or the guidelines of speaking or writing the correct language, error-free language, and therefore you should. So, for example, if in English we say you should put a full stop after a sentence, or you should put an exclamation after a certain type of sentence, and so on. So that should is basically a guidance given to you for speaking the flawless language, and therefore प्रायेण सर्वेषाम् अपि सूत्राणाम् अन्ते स्यात् नो चेत् भवेत् इत्यस्य क्रियापदस्य अध्याहारः क्रियते. Not just the kriyapada, but sometimes some obvious concepts which you can easily guess by looking at the sutra. which are not actually Kriyapada, they are other parts of the sentence, even they are dropped. So kutrachit tu tingantena sah अन्ये अपि सरलरीत्या ज्ञेयाः विषयाः सूत्रात् निष्कासिताः दृश्यन्ते. So there is a sutram called tasya apatyam. Now tasya apatyam means what? A father and son names are not given over there. So tasya apatyam ityukte अत्र उक्तः प्रत्ययः तस्य अपत्यम इत्यस्मिन् अर्थे प्रयोक्तव्यः. So all that remaining baggage, अस्मिन् अर्थे प्रत्ययः प्रयोक्तव्यः, is expected to be understood from the context. It's not coming from any of the previous sutras or anything, but it is to be expected to be understood from the context, and Panini Maharshi just omits it. Or there is another sutram over here, Shashtikaha Shashtiratreena Pachyante. The actual meaning of this sutra is that something that is stored for 60 nights and then gets cooked, a specific type of grain which needs to be processed for 60 nights and only then it becomes ready for cooking. So Shashtiratreena Pachyante. That type of grain is called Shashtika. So Shashtikaha ityukte te padarthaha ye Shashtiratreena Pachyante. So all this intermediate part, ityukte te padarthaha ye, is very obvious in that particular context and therefore it is removed. Anena prakarena kutrachit tingantena sah अन्ये अपि विषयाः सूत्रेषु प्रयुक्ताः न वर्तन्ते. Now it is important to understand that Panini is not just trying to be lazy over here by not using these sentences or not using this Kriyapada, but when there is a real need, Maharshi definitely uses a Kriyapada. So for example, you have this set of sutras, Anyebhyopi Drishyante. Such a pratyaya is seen for other letters. Bhutepi drishyante. This pratyaya is also seen in the bhutakala. Anyesham api drishyate. This particular pratyaya is also seen applicable to other words. So in these particular cases, Panini Maharshi is not actually telling us, or Panini Maharshi is not giving us a permission to apply that pratyaya wherever we want. He is explicitly saying that there are prayogas in the language for which this pratyaya is seen used. Drishyante. So when Maharshi wants to be explicit over here, केचन शब्दाः सन्ति येषां विषये अयं प्रत्ययः भूते अपि प्रयुक्तः दृश्यते. भवान् प्रयोक्तुं शक्नोति इति न, परन्तु प्रयुक्तः दृश्यते. At those places, he is not just being lazy and avoiding the Kriyapada, but he will write the Kriyapada, because if you just say Bhutepi, one might incorrectly interpret it as Bhutepi Syat and might start using that Pratyaya in the Bhutakala, but that's not what Maharshi wants. He only wants to show what has already been in the usage and wants to justify it. So in some cases, he is not removing or ignoring the Kriyapada. So Tiganta Bhava or even Sarala Ritya Jnyanam Vishayanam Nishkasanam is one of the most important techniques, one of the easily implementable techniques for Alpaksharatvam. So that's all about Tinganta Bhava. So Tinganta plus Abhava is Tinganta Bhava. Any questions on this I can take? Otherwise, we will go to the next one, which is Anubandhaha. So there is a question, Krudantanam prayoge api tathaiva tinganta bhavaha drishyate. So in the Sutra Patha, yes. So for example, Krut pratyayas, tavyatavyani yaraha. There is just a list of 3 Krut pratyayas and you don't see any particular Kriyapada over there. So Sarvatra yatra yatra tingantasya abhavam kartum shakyah tatra tatra sarvatra tinganta bhavaha maharshibhi kritaha asti. Any further questions? So let's go to the next one. So the next topic is this Anubandhaha. Now Anubandhaha, we have seen this earlier. Yesterday's class also we discussed about Anubandhaha. So Anubandhaha are those letters which appear either at the end or in the beginning or somewhere in the middle And these letters can appear in the pratyayas, they can appear in the adeshas, agamas, dhatus, and so on. So pratyayeshu, adesheshu, agameshu, dhatushu केचन वर्णाः विशेषकार्यस्य लघुत्वेन निर्देशार्थं स्थापिताः सन्ति. So for example, we have seen this. A verb sheeng has a nakara at the end. This nakara is actually an indicator that the verb will be atmanepadi. Or dukring, there is a nya at the end. This nyakara is an indicator that the verb will be ubhayapadi. So some particular properties are being indicated in the shortest possible manner by using these anubandhas. So pratyayeshu, adesheshu, agameshu vidyamanaha ete sanketa rupena sthapitaha anubandhaha विशेष कार्याणाम लघुत्वेन निर्देशम कुर्वन्ति. So that is again second technique of alpaksharatvam. Instead of continuously saying this dhatu is atmanepadi, this dhatu is ubhayapadi, and so on, Panini Maharshi just puts a marker in that dhatu, and that's his style of expressing that complex property in the shortest possible form. And obviously now there are sutras in Ashtadhyayi that will explain the meanings of those markers. So for example, some of these sutras I've already discussed in some of the previous classes. I mean, not as a sutras directly, but through various examples. So for example, Rasvasya Pitikriti Tuk. In a krut pratyaya, if you see pakara as a anubandha, so for example, lyapa pratyaya has a pakara as anubandha. Kyapa pratyaya has a pakara as anubandha. So this pakara as anubandha is a mechanism of indicating a very specific property. What property? When such a pratyaya is added to a rasva dhatu, so ह्रस्वान्त धातोः यदि अस्य प्रत्ययस्य प्रयोगः क्रियते तर्हि तस्मात् ह्रस्व धातोः अनन्तरं तकारस्य आगमः भवति. So the particle is to be inserted after the dhatu. So for example, if you want to apply the lyapa pratyaya to the kru verb along with the upasarga apa, you will have apa plus kru plus the particle will be inserted, apakrutya will be the final form. Stu plus kyapa. Again, the pratyaya has a pa as anubandha. So stu plus the particle will be inserted, stutya. Nuanipa. This has a pakara as the anubandha. So su plus ta plus vana, sutvana. So instead of saying that insert a takara for a rasvanta dhatu as a separate rule for lyapa and kyapa and muanipa and a bunch of other pith pratyayas, what Panini Maharshi does is he adds a pa in those pratyayas and just creates one sutram rasvasya piti kruti tuka, and this sutram in the shortest possible way creates a possibility or creates a scope of tugagama, takarasya agama in all these various pratyayas and their prakriyas. Yet another example, idito num dhatoho. So if a dhatu has ikara as an anubandha, like for example, you have vadi, you have kapi, you have shaki, then this sutram says that before you do any processing on this dhatu, insert a nakara after the last swara. So essentially it turns out to be before the last letter, but the rule says after the last swara. So basically, vadi iti dhatu asti. The it samyaka ikara is removed in the first step, giving vada. But now because there was it samyaka ikara, a na particle is inserted. So it is a nakara agama and it is a mitta agama. Remember the classification. So it will come after the last swara. So you will get vanda. Similarly, kapi will become kanpa. Shaki will become shanka. Now, in such dhatus, instead of saying insert nakara, insert nakara, insert nakara everywhere, Panini Maharshi creates a short form by adding an ikara as the anubandha, and then he creates a sutram iditonum dhatuho to give the meaning of that anubandha. Similarly, yet another example, nitcha. if an adesha, now this is about adesha. First example was about the pratyaya, second was about the dhatu, third is about adesha. So if an adesha has a ngakara as anubandha, then this adesha should be done only for the last letter of the sthani. So for example, if you have the ning as the adesha in place of jaya, so jaya इत्यस्य स्थाने ning इति आदेशः जाया इति शब्दस्य विषये निङ् इति आदेशः यदा क्रियते तदा सः आदेशः या जाया इति शब्दस्य अन्तिमवर्णस्य स्थाने संस्थाप्यते. So आकार of jaya will be replaced by that ning. So jaya plus ning will be jaya. A will be removed and ni will be added over here. So यद्यपि जाया इति सम्पूर्णस्य शब्दस्य निङ् आदेशः उक्तः अस्ति, तथापि आदेशे ङकारः अनुबन्धः अस्ति, अतः अयम् आदेशः अन्तिम आकारस्य स्थाने एव विधीयते. Let me quickly answer one question that came to my mind right now. जायाया निङ्, is this a pratyaya or an adesha? जाया शब्दान्तस्य बहुव्रीहेः निङ् आदेशः भवति. So I shouldn't have used a plus sign over here. Typing mistake. I'll fix this later on. Jaya, it's not a pratyay. The plus sign might give a wrong impression that it is a pratyay. It is an adesha. So jaya shabdasya ningadesha ityukte antima varnasya ningadesha bhavati. So this way, the second technique of alpaksharatvam that we saw is the anubandhaha. Extremely powerful technique. We are, after a few classes, we are going to spend one full class on understanding different types and the power of anubandhas. But for now, this second technique, we will stop over here and we will go to the next technique, the third technique, which is pratyaya laghavam. If you have questions, please raise hand. Chandramouli Mahoday.
Sir, on the previous topic of Alpaksharam, we say that we are actually inferring a certain verbal phrase to complete the sutra vritti, so to say. While it can, when we are saying it for Alpaksharam, how does the asandigdham part play into it? How do you make sure?
Correct. That's a good question. So asandigdhatva part will only come in the picture if a certain sutra has multiple possible interpretations. But for example, if Shashtika is a well-known term in the language, at least at that particular time, where everybody knows that it is related to grains, then there is no asandigdhatva over there. So to always understand that the grammar is created in the context of the society and the language which is popular at that particular time. Okay?
Okay, got it. Thanks.
Any other questions specific to either Tagyanta or Anubandhaha? Okay, no questions. Agre gacchamaha. The third technique that Panini Maharshi uses for Alpaksharatvam is a Pratyaya Laghavam. Keshuchit Pratyayeshu Kechana Varnaha Laghavartham Sthapitaha Santi. So we are not talking about the Anubandha part. So in the Lyapa Pratyaya, Pa is an Anubandha that has a different purpose. Now we are talking about actual Pratyayas or the letters in the Pratyayas, and they are also kept for Alpaksharatvam. So here is an example. We see these Pratyayas. There is a Thaka Pratyaya. Most of you know this Pratyaya. There is another Pratyaya called Thana. There is another Pratyaya called Tha. Now, in all these pratyayas, the beginning letter is a thakara. This thakara is actually kept for laghavartha. It is not itsamyaka, it is not anubandha. It is not going to indicate certain particular step in the prakriya. This thakara is kept as a representative for an actual particle called ika. So Panini actually wants to create three pratyayas like ikak or ikan or ika. So instead of creating ikak, he creates thak. Instead of creating ikan, he creates than. Instead of creating ika, he creates tha. So basically, instead of having this particular, so this half tha is being used as a mechanism of alpaksharatvam for this ika. Now you will ask, is this really alpaksharatvam? Maybe E is ek one matra and K is half a matra. So that's actually 1.5 matra. And on the left hand side, this Th is half a matra. So somewhat there is a reduction of matra. So ardha matra laghavena putrotsavam manyante vayyakarana. But there is yet another reason for this kind of usage of Th instead of ika. What happens is, in most of the cases, Panini Maharshi wants the pratyaya to be ika, but in a few cases, Panini Maharshi wants the pratyaya to be uka. So, in some cases, he wants it to be ika. In some other cases, he wants it to be uka. And instead of saying ika and uka multiple times, he will just use the same letter called th and will give different set of rules to indicate where that ika will come and where that uka will come. So alpaksharatvam by matra reduction is definitely one aspect, plus alpaksharatvam because of the multiple possible interpretations of that letter is also another possible reason why this kind of thakara is used. So thasye kaha and then isusuktantat kaha, uka or ka, I forgot. So thasye kaha is a sutram over here and immediate text is isusuktantat kaha. Adau vidyavasa kakarasya kakara desha bhavati. So my mistake, not uka. So let's so you have ika, it either gets converted, so you have th, it either gets converted to ika or it gets converted to ka. So depending on one pathway or the other, there are sutras that will give this conversion, and then Panini Maharshi will use a single thakara to have that particular alpaksharatvam achieved. So this is just one example. You have another, so that's the more details. So thaka becomes ika, thaka becomes ikan, and so on. Sarvatra puna puna ika iti lekhanasya apekshaya th ityasya prayogah kritah asti. Just note one small thing. You can write ika with a full kakara and then you have to say th with a full akara. So full thakara. So you write akara at the end or you don't write akara anywhere. So you say ika with a half ka is being represented by half t. So you can either do that or you can say ika with a full ka is represented by th with an akara present over there. Another example, there are pratyayas that Panini Maharshi uses, lyu, luta, ryuta, and so on. In all these pratyayas, Panini Maharshi has used this u particle over here, u particle, ya, anunasika ya plus ukara. So this u particle is also again for laghava. This u is converted to ana. So lyu is ana, luta is ana, ryuta is also ana. So instead of saying ana every time, Panini Maharshi uses lyu over here. Again, another mechanism for alpaksharatvam. Yet another example, we have those tiptas jhi, sipthas tha, mipwasmas, ta atam jha. So jhi and jha, those pratyas that are used in that list are also for alpaksharatvam, for laghavartham, because then there are sutras by which in some cases the jhakara will be converted to anta, in some other cases atta, in some other cases rana, in some other cases jusa. So instead of explicitly stating these pratyas again and again, Panini Maharshi replaces them with a single entity called G or J, and that's also another way of achieving alpaksharatvam. Not just this, but yet another very important example that I have not quoted over here. Just all the ting pratyayas, tiptas ji, sipthastha, mipvasmastha, atam jha, thasatham dhvam, it vahi mahing. In all the 10 lakaras, these pratyayas get altogether different forms. So in lat lakara, the eventual form is titaha anti sithaha tha mi vahamaha. In lot lakara, it is tu tamantu shunyatam ta aniyavam. In lang lakara, something else. In lit lakara, nal atus us, and so on. So instead of giving all these pratyas, which would be probably what 180 pratyas or whatever, so 10 lakaras into 18 pratyas for each, so 180 pratyas, instead of giving that, Panini Maharshi captures everything in those 21 pratyayas or 18 pratyayas, tiptas, ji, siptas, ta, mipasma, and 18 for and 9 for Atmanepada. So he captures everything in those 18 pratyayas and then gives sutras which will succinctly transform these pratyayas into different new pratyayas that the corresponding lakaras require. So by all these mechanisms, certain letters, somebody is asking, is that a sanya? So no, thak, thant, th are names of pratyayas. They are not sanyas. These individual parts of this pratyayas like th or u or j are used as placeholders or are used as indicators of other types of shabdas, other types of letter combinations like ik or an or ant, at, and so on. And then there are sutras given for this kind of conversion. So that's all about pratyaya laghavatvam. So we have, going back all the way to the first slide, we talked about tinganta bhavaha, we talked about anubandhaha, and we talked about pratyaya laghavam. Any questions on these three? Only two topics are remaining. Hopefully we should be able to finish early today. So the next one is pratyaharaha. Let's actually open the pratyahara page. And pratyahara is what we have also seen in the yesterday's class in details. So yatra kasyachana samuhasya nirdeshaha punah punah avashyakaha asti. So when you want to represent all swaras again and again and again, tatra tasya samuhasya prathama shabdasya kinchana aksharam तथा च अंतिम शब्दस्य किंचन अक्षरम. So this is actually a general definition, and I'm going to come to why this kind of definition is created. But when it comes to the pratyaharas based on Shiva Sutras, we know that we pick a particular letter, like for example, a of Ayuna, and then we pick an Anubandha, say for example, Ayuna Ruluko Eonga Yocha Hayavarata. So that Lana is created. This pratyahara will be generated starting from Ayuna to Lana, and then everything sitting in between will be included in that pratyahara. So kasyachana samohasya nirdeshaha yatra avashyakaha punah punah avashyakaha vartate. Punah punah means what? Even if it is required once, you can still use the pratyahara. But when you are using it for more times, the power of that pratyahara tremendously increases. So punah punah avashyakaha vartate. तत्र तस्य समूहस्य प्रथम शब्दस्य किंचन अक्षरम तथा अंतिम शब्दस्य किंचन अक्षरम एतयोः मेलनेन प्रत्याहारस्य निर्माणं भवति. प्रत्याहारस्य च अग्रे सूत्रेषु प्रयोगः कृतः दृश्यते. So as I mentioned, we have seen the pratyaharas based on the Maheshwara Sutras yesterday. But the reason I'm talking about this particular topic again over here is that the concept of pratyahara is not only limited to Maheshwara Sutras. Panini Maharshi has done the pratyaharas on the pratyayas, and he has done the pratyaharas on the dhatus as well. So let's understand this. We have the 21 sup pratyayas, su, aujas, auchsa, stabhyam, vis, and so on. And the very reason why they are called sup pratyayas is because a sup is a pratyahara. You take the first pratyaya su, you take the last prakara, which is the anubandha of the last pratyaya, and you combine them together to form super, which is exactly like your acha, and now it includes all the pratyayas sitting in between. So the word that you are talking, super or tinga, are actually pratyaharas which are generated using the same technique. Pick something from the first, pick something from the last, and combine them together to indicate everything in between along with that first and last. So that's basically the super or tinga as pratyaharas. And then these pratyaharas are used in sutras like supodhatu pradipatikayoho, avyayadap supaha, oho supi, supicha, and so on. Same way the ting pratyas, tiptas ji, sipthastha, and so on up to mahin. The reason why we call them as ting pratyas are starting from ti up to nga, mahing ityasya ngakarena sah yojanam krutva, you get a ting pratyahara which includes all the pratyayas in between. It is used in sutras like Upapadamating or Krudating, Bhusvos Ting, Tinga Tingaha, and so on. Now, interesting point is that this particular list of su, aujas, and so on is used not just to create one pratyahara, but it is used to create a few other pratyaharas as well. So understand this. There is su, au, jas, and out. There is this takara which is anubandha over here. Combining su with this ta creates yet another pratyahara called sutta. So sutta is yet another pratyahara which includes the first five pratyayas su, au, jas, and out. This sutta pratyahara is used in sutras like Suda Napumsakasya. So we are going to study this sutram in a few classes, but there are sutras in which this sutta pratyahara is used. Similarly, for the ting pratyaharas, we start with this ta, which is sitting in middle, which is basically the first pratyaya in the Atmanepada section. Till the mas, it is the Parasmaipada section. From ta, Atmanepada section starts. And we take this ta and combine with this last nakara to form yet another pratyaya called tanga, which is used in sutras like Tanganam Atmanepadam. So tanga is for the pratyaya used in Ashtadhyayi, which represents all the last 9 pratyayas in this sequence. So in the same way, you have a bunch of other examples over here. So on the pratyahara page, we list all the pratyaharas in the beginning, and then we have this super pratyahara, which is the full list. You have sutta pratyahara, which is su, au, jas, out. We have ap, yet another pratyahara, which starts with the same in the same list, but it starts from this a of ta. So ta ityasmat arabhya sup iti yavat, you have an ap pratyahara. So the same list from su to supa is used to create 3 pratyaharas. One is the full pratyahara called supa, other is first 5 pratyas with sutta, and next is starting from ta, everything else called apa. Similarly, we have ting pratyayas, which is basically from tip to mahing, and then the second half is also captured by tang pratyaya, ta, atam, jha, tha, sa, tham, dham, and so on. There are also pratyaharas that are created from dhatus. So for example, kru, bhu, and asa. These 3 dhatus are considered combined in a pratyahara called krunya. Now, where is this ya coming up? We will keep this question aside. Maybe at some point in time, whenever you learn Krunchanu Prayujatility, you will understand more about it. But for now, just understand that you have Kru, Bhu, and Asa combined together in form of the Pratyahara called Kriya. Similarly, there is a Pratyahara called Truna. I think it's already there on the website. So there is yet another Pratyahara called Truna, which combines 5 Krut Pratyayas: Shatru, Shanach, Shanan, Shanash, and Truna. So 5 pratyayas. Some of you might not even know that these pratyayas exist. Like Shatru and Shanach are very well known. But Shanan, Shanash, and Truna, not Trucha, Truna. So these are also pratyayas. And there is a sutram called Naloka Nishtha Khalartha Trunam. There is this word Truna in this particular sutram. And Bhashyakara says that this Truna is not just the last Truna pratyaya, but it is a pratyahara which includes 5 pratyayas starting from the tru of Shatru up to the na of Truna. So 5 pratyayas, Shatru, Shanach, Shanan, Chanash, and Truna are included in this sutram. In this way, the concept of pratyahara, I have given a few more examples over here, you can go through them later on. But in this way, the concept of pratyahara is used as another important powerful technique for alpaksharatvam. So this is all about the pratyahara. Now there is a question, a long question over here. Let me read. In Supratyahara, unlike Maheshwara Sutrani, Here it carries the anubandhas of the every pratyaya. For example, when you say sutta, it means su, au, out. So it includes all the anubandhas. So the question is phrased in a slightly wrong way. The reason I'm saying is that when you take the sutta pratyahara, it is actually a collection of pratyayas together. It is not the collection of varnas. When it comes to the collection of varnas, discarding or using anubandhas, that kind of question or that kind of thinking might make sense. But when it is the collection of pratyayas, ama is a full entity, outer is a full entity. What is inside outer, whether some part of outer is anubandha or not, is irrelevant when you are expanding that pratyahara of pratyayas. So in case of sutta, it is actually 5 pratyayas like su, au, jas, and out. What sits inside that packet is irrelevant. So this particular aspect of ignoring versus not ignoring anubandhas, which played a very vital role in the yesterday's class, doesn't really matter over here. So the question is, are there essentially now 52 pratyaharas? Yes. So the total number of pratyaharas that are used in Ashtadhyayi is 52, out of which you can see 44. You remember yesterday our final count was 44 when we accepted the ra pratyahara. So 44 are the pratyaharas from the Maheshwara Sutras, and the rest are with this special technique. So super, sutta, and apa are all based on the 21 supratyas. Ting and tang are based on the 18 ting pratyas. Kruya is a special pratyahara for the 3 verbs. Truna is a pratyahara for 5 krut pratyas. And sang is a very special pratyahara which includes all the pratyayas that are attached to dhatus. So in this, I can actually talk more about it. So in the Sutra Patha, in the chapter number 3, let's go to the Parayanam. So if you go to Parayanam and chapter number 3, Tritiyadhyaye Prathama Padha. So this entire chapter number 3 is for the Dhatu Pratyayas. Starting from 3.1.1 up to end of 3 is all Dhatu Pratyayas. So the very first Pratyaya that is discussed is Guptich Kidbhyas Sana. That's the first Pratyaya. So you start with this of Sana. And then we go all the way at the end of 3.4. So where the Dhatu Pratyayas are ending. And all the way at the end of 3.4, the last pratyaya that is mentioned by Panini Maharshi is this tiptasj. Let me put it a little above. This tiptasji tipthasta mipvasmas, and the last entity of that is mahing. So you take the nakara of mahing and you take the sakara of sana to create a pratyahara called sang pratyahara, which is that pratyahara which we saw on the in the 52nd entry in the Pratyaharavali. This is the Sang Pratyahara. So Dhatubhya Vihita Sarvepi Pratyaha, starting from the very first San Pratyaya up to the last Mahim Pratyaya, everything is included over here. So that's the total number of 52 Pratyaharas. There is a question over here. Is there any sutra that says this is the way it has to be considered? The answer to this question is always Vyakhyanato Vishesha Pratipattihi. So if not a sutra, there will be a Vartika. If not Vartika, there will be a comment from the Bhashyakara. So Munitrayam Pramanam and Vyakhyanato Vishesha Pratipattihi. That's the answer to all such type of questions. Okay, and obviously the last line on the slide, along with this, we cannot forget the Shiva Sutraihi Dirvitaha Pratyaharaha. So an ach ityadayah api laghavartham eva krutaha vartante. So that's all about the Pratyaharas. Any questions you can either type or you can raise hands and I'll discuss that. So we have now completed Tingantabhava, Anubandhaha, Pratyelaghavam, Pratyaharaha. The last section, which is, I kept it at the last because most of you are probably aware of this, Anuvritti, Apakarsha, and Mandukaplitihi. So what is Anuvritti? Anuvritti is a mechanism of reusing the words from the previous sutram into the next sutram. So coming back to the example of our classroom, for example, teacher might say, Devdatta goes to library. And on the second line, the teacher might just say, Yajnadatta as well. Now, if you just look at the second line, Yajnadatta as well, this particular second line has no complete meaning on its own. What do you mean by as well? So you have to take the relevant portion from the previous line. As well goes to the library. So Devadatta doesn't need to be taken up because that instruction was for Devadatta. But Devadatta goes to the library. That goes to the library needs to be brought in, and then Yajnadatta as well goes to the library. That now becomes a complete instruction. This kind of approach is used almost everywhere in Ashtadhyayi. So, kramena vidyamaneshu sutreshu ye shabdaha punah punah avashyakaha. So, for example, teacher might say Devadatta goes to the library. Then the teacher says Yajnadatta as well. Then teacher will say Somadatta after the lunch break. And then teacher might say Vishnu Sharman tomorrow. So then goes to the library has to be taken everywhere in all those remaining three sentences. So in this way, क्रमेण विद्यमानेषु सूत्रेषु ये शब्दाः पुनः पुनः आवश्यकाः ते तस्य क्रमस्य प्रथमे सूत्रे स्थापिताः वर्तन्ते. So for example, if you take this initial set of sutras, न धातु लोप आर्ध धातु के, किपि च, दीधि वेवी टाम, these three sutras, then this na particle which is present in na dhatu lopardha dhatu ke needs to be carried in kingi teacher and also in the dhive tam. So essentially the meaning over here is na dhatu lopardha dhatu ke as one sutra, kingi teacher na iti another is the second one, iti dvitiyam sutram, and na didhi tam is yet the third sutram. So everywhere this nakara is carried from the first sutram, this process is called anuvritti. So kramena vidyamaneshu sutreshu ye shabda punah punah avashyakaha te tasya kramasya prathame sutre sthapitaha santi. That set of words, when you take into the next sutras, this process is called anuvritti. So uttara yoga vyapini anuvritti iti uchyate. So here is an example. Na dhatu lopardha dhatu ke kingiti cha didhi vevitam एतेषु त्रिषु अपि शब्देषु न इति शब्दः आवश्यकः. अस्यां स्थितौ अयं केवलं प्रथमे सूत्रे स्थापितः अस्ति. अन्ययोः द्वयोः सूत्रयोः अयं शब्दः अनुवृत्तिरूपेण स्वीक्रियते. Another interesting example in 1.3, let's go to this Parayanam. The only reason I go to Parayanam is because it gives us the, where did Parayanam go? It gives us an adhyay by adhyay view. So it is easier for us to understand. So if you go to this particular 1.3, there is this word upadeshe present in 1.3.2. This upadeshe, it is carried into halantyam, na vibhaktau tu smaha, adirgitudabha, shav pratyase, chutu, and la shakvatathite. So it is carried all the way till 1.3.8. So again, it is present only in the first sutram and it is carried all the way till the multiple sutras later on. So Upadeshe ajanunasika ita ityasmat arabhya lashakvatadhite iti sutram yavat Upadeshe iti shabdaha तथा च इत उपदेशे अजनुनासिक इत. सो इत इति अपि शब्दः अग्रिमसूत्रेषु आवश्यकः. एतौ शब्दौ केवलं प्रथमे सूत्रे एव स्थापितौ स्तः. तस्मादेव अवशिष्टेषु सर्वेषु सूत्रेषु एतेषां ग्रहणं भवति. This is called anuvritti. Now interestingly, this anuvritti can also cross padas. So there is this peculiar example. There are multiple examples, but I am just picking one peculiar example. There is this sutram dhralope purvasya dirghonaha. It is in 6.3. And there is the word dirgha present in dhralope purvasya dirghonaha. And this word dirgha will go as an anuvritti in all the following sutras. It will cross 6.3, it will enter 6.4 and go till 18th sutram. So dhalope purvasya dirghonaha ityasmin sutre vidyamanaha dirghaha iti shabdaha kramaschakti iti sutra paryantam. In a total of 46 sutras, it is carried over here. So in this way, words in specific sutras are, if needed, they are carried in the subsequent sutras. That is called anuvritti. And now obviously, the most important question is, how do we know which word is an anuvritti? And how do we know till what place the anuvritti goes away? is carried, and at what point the anuvritti stops. So obviously these are no-brainer questions, and the answer is that यस्य शब्दस्य अनुवृत्तिः संभवति सः शब्दः स्वरितस्वरेण सह उच्चार्यते इति परंपरा आसीत्. So when the traditional way of reciting the sutra patha existed, at that point in time, the words that came as anuvrittis were pronounced using one swara as a swarita swara. Understand this point. Entire Sutra Patha is not being pronounced with Udatta, Anudatta, Swarita, Swaras. Sutra Patha is mostly Ekashruti, single tone. But there are some words which are pronounced with some Swarita Swara here and there, and these are the ones that are to be carried as Anuvritti. Now, obviously, today we have lost all these particular pronunciation techniques. So, today, how do we understand whether the particular word is connected or carried ahead as anuvritti or not? Today, we have to rely on commentaries. So, adya vyakhyanaanam eva adharena anuvrittihi asti uta nasti iti vaktum shakyate. That's why on our website we have for each particular sutram we have a very specific section in the beginning. So what is the anuvritti in that particular sutram? So starting from Upadeshe Ajanunasika Ita, you can see Upadeshe and Ita are carried as anuvrittis till all the sutras like Lashakvatadhite. Even I think the next one, no, Tasya Lopa is not there. So till Lashakvatadhite, Upadeshe and Ita are carried as anuvritti. So you use Vyakhyanas and you understand which word is anuvritti and till where it goes. So kasya shabdasya anuvrittihi katishu sutreshu bhavati, till where it goes, this is only seen through Vyakhyanas. So even in the traditional parampara, the Swarita Swara was used to indicate the starting point of anuvritti. But there was no marker. There is some discussion about it, but there was no marker for the ending point of anuvritti. So कुत्र तस्य शब्दस्य अनुवृत्तिः समाप्यते तस्य ज्ञानं तु व्याख्यानादेव भवति. And for today, the starting as well as ending is all about from the व्याख्यानास. So कस्य शब्दस्य अनुवृत्तिः भवति तथा न भवति, अपि च कस्य शब्दस्य अनुवृत्तिः कियत् सूत्रपर्यन्तं गच्छति, तस्य सर्वस्य ज्ञानम् अद्य व्याख्यानात् एव भवति. Now, there are a few questions, there are a few raised hands, but let me finish some important topics. I think most of your questions will automatically get answered. If not, I will allow you to ask your questions. So now, after discussing this particular topic about anuvritti, one question that's already even asked over here, and that should come to your mind, is what is exactly the difference between adhikara and anuvritti? Because adhikara is also exactly doing the same thing. It is copied across all these sutras, whereas anuvritti is almost exactly the same thing. So the difference between adhikara and anuvritti is actually a gray line. Let's first understand the difference as the Vyakhyanas explain it, and then I will explain why it is called gray line. So, anuvritti is what? Uttara yoga vyapini anuvritti, as we have mentioned right now. So, yoga means sutram. Uttara yoga vyapini, a word which is applicable across the subsequent sutras, is anuvritti. So, saha shabdaha यः मूलसूत्रे आवश्यकः अस्ति तथा च अग्रिमेषु केषुचित् सूत्रेषु अपि आवश्यकः अस्ति, परन्तु तत्र पुनः पुनः स्थापनस्य अपेक्षया केवलं प्रथमे सूत्रे एव संस्थाप्यते, तथा च अग्रिमेषु सूत्रेषु तस्य ग्रहणं भवति, सः शब्दः अनुवृत्तिः नाम्ना ज्ञायते. So the example was na dhatu lopardha dhatuke has this nakara which is carried to the two next sutras, the king teacher and the didhi vevi tam. Adhikara, on the other hand, is uttara prakarana vyapi adhikaraha. So if you see a certain set of sutras as a logical prakaranam, as a logical conceptual chapter, and if you want to give a title or a heading of that prakarana, that will now be considered, that gets considered as adhikara. So kasyapi prakarnasya सर्वेषु सूत्रेषु आवश्यकः शब्दः पृथक् निष्कास्य प्रकरणस्य प्रथमसूत्ररूपेण संस्थाप्यते अस्य अधिकारसूत्रस्य स्वस्य पृथक् प्रयोजनं नास्ति. So this upadeshe and ita, which are used in upadeshe jananasika, have their own use in that sutra and have their used in the subsequent sutras. But when it comes to adhikara sutras, and adhikara sutra is like a topic heading, it is placed all the way in the beginning. Tasya swasya arthaha nasti. So we have learned this definition. Some of you have also answered it in the homework. Swadeshe phalashunyatve sati. There is no specific phala of that sutram in its original place where it is written. So angasya iti adhikaraha asti. All the rules given in this 6.4 are to be applied for an entity called anga. So angasya iti adhikaraha षष्ठाध्यायस्य चतुर्थपादात् आरभ्य सप्तमाध्यायस्य परिसमाप्तिं यावद् वर्तते. So the angasya adhikara is 5 padas together: 6.4, 7.1, 7.2, 7.3 and 7.4. Every karya that is given over there is for an anga. So we extract that particular angasya all the way in the beginning and keep it as an adhikara sutra. This sutra has a swadesha phalashunyatva. It doesn't mean anything on its own. Kevalam swasya adhikara kshetre sarvatra angasya 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 iti vishayaha asmabhihi smartavyaha iti darshayitum अंगस्य इति शब्दः तत्र पृथक् रूपेण तस्य क्षेत्रस्य व्याप्तेः आरम्भे संस्थापितः अस्ति. So basically, if it is just random set of sutras, you call it anuvritti. If it is a conceptual module or a conceptual prakaranam, you call it adhikara. Somebody is asking over here, can anuvritti cross padas but adhikara not? Both of them can cross padas. So for example, adhikara, angasya adhikara, as I mentioned over here, is for 5 different padas. Whereas anuvritti also, in the previous example, dhralope purvasa dirghona, we have seen it can cross padas. Is there a limitation on the size? So actually there are adhikaras which are just 10 sutras long. There are adhikaras which are just 15 sutras long. Whereas there are big anuvrittis like that dhralope purvasedi guna is 46 sutra long anuvritti. So again, you cannot very easily distinguish based on the number of sutras for which it spans. You cannot very easily distinguish based on the pada that it crosses. A general understanding of general way mechanism of distinguishing it is whether it is being carried purely for alpaksharatvam. So there are actually cases where Panini Maharshi puts absolutely irrelevant sutras one after the other only because he wants to reuse some words. You will actually see these kind of examples when you progress in your study of Ashtadhyayi. Completely irrelevant sutras. It makes you think why Maharshi has put this random sutram over here. So for example, he's talking about some agama and a random sutra will be put over there purely because some words from those previous sutras are to be reused. So in this way, when it comes to anuvrittis, there is no need of understanding or retaining the context. Whereas when it comes to adhikara, it's actually a kind of prakarana whose heading is given as an adhikara. However, as I mentioned earlier, the line between anuvritti and adhikara is pretty fuzzy. One of the reasons is that even the adhikaras are indicated by the swarita swara. Anuvrittis are also indicated by swarita swara. Not just that, but Bhashyakara uses the word adhikara to indicate anuvrittis. Even Panini Maharshi, there is a sutram in right in this 1.3 only. This one, Swaritena Adhikaraha. Panini Maharshi uses the word adhikara. This is the sutram which tells us that Swarita Swara is used for carrying those words. Swaritena, ityukte Swarita Swarena adhikarasya nirdeshaha bhavati. And look at the meaning. Asmin sutra pathe anuvrittehe nirdeshaha Swarita Swarena krita asti. So anuvritti and adhikaras are exactly interchangeable. Interchangeable in the sense both words are represented for the same concept of something carried in the sutras later on. That's exactly the reason I had mentioned earlier when we looked at six Bhedas, Samnya, Paribhasha, Vidhi, Niyama. I stress this point again and again that these differences are for your own understanding. Whether a sutra is Adhikara Sutra or Vidhi Sutra doesn't really matter in the Prakriya when that particular sutra is to be used. So this actually, that point is highlighted over here. That words like anuvritti and adhikara are purely for understanding of a student. When it comes to the actual commentaries, Bhashyakara, even Panini Maharshi uses the word adhikara to also indicate anuvritti. So Mahabhashyasya व्याख्याने अनुवृत्तीनाम अपि अधिकार शब्देनैव निर्देशः कृतः अस्ति. There is a very beautiful passage from Mahabhashya where Patanjali Maharshi gives three different types of adhikaras. So he says there are three different types of adhikaras in Ashtadhyayi. He explains these three types of adhikaras. Only one of these adhikaras is what we call today by the word adhikara. So whatever that pratyayaha, angasya and anabhite and so on, all these adhikaras that we refer in today's discussion is actually only one type of adhikara. The second type of adhikara that Bhashyakara indicates is actually anuvritti. So let's read this. Bhashyakara says, this is in the Shashti Sthane Yoga Sutram, adhikaro nama tri prakaraha. There are three types of adhikaras. Very beautiful, one of my favorite passages in Mahabhashyam. So kaschid ekadeshasthaha sarvam shastram abhijwalayati. An adhikara, one type of adhikara, is like a lamp in the room, is like a deepa in the room, where it sits in one place and illuminates the entire room. So this is like that angasya. It sits in the beginning of the prakaranam and illuminates the entire prakaranam. So kashchit ekadeshasthaha sits in one place. Ekadeshasthaha sarvam shastram abhijwalayati. Yatha प्रदीपः सुप्रज्वलितः सर्वं वेश्म इत्युक्ते गृहं सर्वं गृहम् अभिज्वलयति. A lamp does not need to move everywhere, just sits in one place and it illuminates the entire room. So an angasya title in the beginning, you don't need to copy angasya everywhere. An angasya title in the beginning will say that everything in this adhikara is for an entity called anga. The pratyayaha title in the beginning will say everything in the adhikara is for an entity called pratyaya. So adhikarasya trayah bhedaha. First of them is ekasutrasthaha adhikaraha. प्रकरणस्य प्रारंभिकसूत्रे स्थाप्यते. तथा च अनेन अधिकारेण विशिष्टस्य प्रकरणस्य निर्देशः भवति. This is what we traditionally refer to as adhikara, like that angasya. Other examples are pratyayaha, tadhitaha, and so on. There is a little bit of advanced discussion in Vyakarana where all the Paribhasha sutras are also considered adhikara by this definition. Because a Paribhasha sutra also sits in one place and then it illuminates, basically, it spans entire Ashtadhyayi and it defines or it creates an impact on various sutras in Ashtadhyayi. But we will keep that aside. Just understand that the typical adhikara that we today understand is this first type of adhikara. Ekasutrasthaha adhikaraha. Paribhashas are also included in this category. What is the description? Kaschid ekadeshasthaha sarvam shastram abhijwalayati yatha pradipaha suprajwalitaha sarvam veshma abhijwalayati. The second adhikara, aparaha adhikaraha. So how is this adhikara? Imagine a garland, a mala, in which there is a thread passing through all the flowers. Or imagine a rope and clothes are hanging on that rope. So there is a common rope passing all the clothes. Or imagine a metal chain. So say for example, train compartments are linked through that metal chain. So there is one continuous thread and this thread explicitly runs across all those sutras. So aparaha adhikaraha yatha rajva, rajju ityukte thread or rope. Yes, ityukte that metal, loha. So rajva ayasava baddham kashtham anukrusyate tadvad anukrusyate chakarena. So there is second type of adhikara. I have actually listed it third for a reason. So we'll actually discuss that third. So let's keep that aside. That's the second one listed in this particular statement from the Bhashya. And the third one, aparaha adhikaraha, the third one, प्रतियोगम तस्य अनिर्देशार्थः इति योगे योगे उपतिष्ठते. So the third adhikara is the one where the words are carried from the first sutra into the subsequent sutras. So this is actually anuvrutti. So yoge yoge means sutre sutre, upatishthate means presents itself. So words from the previous sutram explicitly are copied in the subsequent sutram. Yoge yoge upatishthate saha adhikaraha. So that's the third type of adhikara. Pratiyogam. So it is present only in the first sutra, and after that, for the pratyekam sutram, wherever it is required, yoge yoge upatishthate. So this is anuvritti. Purva sutreshu vidyamanani padani yatra avashyakam tatra agrima sutreshu svikriyante. So this way, anuvritti is also now another type of adhikara. Like this, the first description, Kashchid Ekadeshasthaha Sarvam Shastram Abhijwalayati, that's our today's adhikara. The third one, Pratiyogam Tasya Nirdeshartha iti yoge yoge upatishthate, that's our today's anuvrutti. Eventually all are same, now we can understand from Bhashya. And this middle one that I gave an example of a thread and the flowers are connected to that thread, but the thread continuously passes. So that is Chakarena Anukrishtaha Adhikaraha. So sometimes Panini Maharshi explicitly pulls words from the previous sutram using cha iti chakarasya prayogena. So for example, there is a sutram upasargaha kriya yoge 1460, upasargaha kriya yoge 1459, upasargaha kriya yoge, and the immediately next sutram is gatishcha. So that upasarga word is pulled down. Both, in fact, upasarga and kriya yoge are pulled down with this chakara. The next sutram, uryadi chvida chascha. So this cha present in the subsequent sutras, it acts as that thread which brings. So the way first flower is connected to the other flower by an actual physical thread that passes. In the same way, the words from the previous sutram are taken in the next sutram, not by a swarita swara or not by some hypothetical assumption, but by an explicit chakara that passes through the sutras. So that's the third type, chakarena anukrishtaha adhikaraha. Kutrachit purvasutrasthaha shabdaha samuchaya bodhaka chakara. Chakara means and. So that's the samuchaya bodhaka. Samuchaya bodhaka shakarasya prayoga samarthyat agrima sutre svikriyante. So gatischa, numbers are screwed up. I'll fix them later on. So gatischa iti sutre vidyamanasya chakarasya vidhana samarthyat upasargaha kriya yoge ityasmat purva sutrad dvau api shabdau upasarga and kriya yoge. So dvau api shabdau upasargaha tatha kriya yoge. I'll fix this description. Upasargaha tatha kriya yoge gatischa ityatra anuvrutti rupena svikriyete. Dvau shabdau svikriyete. So in this way, the chakara is actually used as the indicator of pulling things. Somebody is asking, is it the marker of anuvritti? In one way, it is a marker of anuvritti, but it is not used everywhere. So this is a special type of anuvritti where you don't need a swarita swara. You can bring those particular words using the chakara. In fact, ye shabdaha chakara balat svikrutaha santi tesham nirdeshaha vyakyanishu anuvartate iti shabdena na bhavati apitu anukrusyate. A different word is used. So for example, if you go to Ashtadhyayi Vyakhyananveshanam, you can actually type over here Anukrusyate. You search for Anukrusya and go to Vyakhyananveshanam, you can see Chat Shita iti Anukrusyate. So Chakarasya balat something Anukrusyate. Shakarasya balat something Anukrusyate. So Pluta Pragriyaha Anukrusyante. There is a Chakara, Iko Savarne Shakalya Sarasvascha. So Chakarasya balat Anukrusyate. So this third type of anuvritti, which happens because of the common thread, the chakara, common way of representing, it's not a rule, it's just an observation that the way it is represented in the bhashya or in the commentaries is using the word anukrishyate, primarily because bhashyakara uses that word. So he says, अपरः अधिकारः यथा रज्ज्वा अयसावा बद्धं काष्ठम अनुकृष्यते तद्वद अनुकृष्यते चकारेण. So this particular way Bhashyakara is representing three different types of adhikaras. One is like a deepa. So let's read this now. कश्चिदेकदेशस्थः सर्वं शास्त्रम् अभिज्वलयति यथा प्रदीपः सुप्रज्वलितः सर्वं वेश्माभिज्वलयति. That's the adhikara in the common today's discussion. अपरः अधिकारः यथा रज्ज्वा अयसावा बद्धं काष्ठमनुकृष्यते तद्वद अनुकृष्यते चकारेण. So that's the third. You can call it anuvritti, but it is basically represented with the word anukrishyate. And the third one, अपरः अधिकारः प्रतियोगं तस्य अनिर्देशार्थः इति योगे योगे उपतिष्ठते. So that's actually the anuvritti that takes place, that gets copied from sutra to sutra. So this is basically भाष्ये त्रयाणां प्रकार अधिकाराणां त्रयः भेदाः त्रयः प्रकाराः उक्ताः वर्तन्ते. Okay, I have a few more slides. So wherever I say the class will end early, few more slides are always there. So let me take those two slides and then I'll allow people to ask questions. So there is a special type of anuvritti called as manduka pluti. Again, it is a type of anuvritti, very simple to understand. Manduka means frog. So how does a frog jump? A frog never walks, like from x to x plus 1 to x plus 2. Like that, a frog doesn't walk. Frog basically jumps. So sometimes what happens is, some words from the sutra, they are not carried down consecutively, but they will skip some sutras and they will jump into another sutra. So a word, technically, when we say anuvritti, a word from sutra X should be copied to x plus 1, x plus 2, x plus 3, x plus 4 sequentially. But sometimes what happens is a word from sutra X is not taken in x plus 1 and x plus 2, but it directly comes in x plus 3. So that's a jump. This kind of jump, like a frog's jump, is called manduka plutihi. So kutrachit सूत्रेषु विद्यमानः कश्चन शब्दः क्रमं त्यक्त्वा इत्युक्ते कानिचन सूत्राणि विहाय अग्रिमसूत्रेषु अनुवृत्तिरूपेण प्रयुक्तः दृश्यते. This is called manduka pluti. Manduka pluti is also a special type of anuvritti where sequential iteration of the words is not there. Some words, some sutras are skipped. So there is a sutra Tena Tulyam Kriya Chedvatihi 51115. This sutram has the word Kriya. This Kriya word is taken as anuvritti, but not in 51116. So 51116 is skipped, and in the immediately next sutram 51117, that Kriya word directly jumps. So this is Manduka pluti. Sometimes 2 sutras, 3 sutras, 5 sutras are also seen, the jump. So from 6322, there is a word putra which directly jumps to 6325. From 63106, there is a vibhasha word which skips 9 sutras in between and directly jumps to 63116, nahivriti vrishi, and so on. So that word vibhasha jumps over there. So this way, again, sometimes the words skip that sequence and directly jump after a few sutras and appear over there as anuvritti. This has a special term called manduka pluti. Again, which is manduka pluti is understood only from vyakhyanas. And there is actually, when it comes to vyakhyanas are very lenient about usage of the word. So whether it is manduka pluti or anuvritti, the vyakhyanas will usually use the word anuvritti. So you have to actually see whether it is coming from the previous sutram or whether it is coming from few sutras behind. So व्याख्यानेषु बहुषु स्थलेषु मण्डूकप्लुतेः निर्देशः अपि अनुवृत्ति शब्देन एव कृतः अस्ति. So there is this particular sutram apadane panchami. The word panchami from this sutram jumps 4 sutra letter into Prithagvinananabhi Sutram, that's 2, 3, 32. So 4 sutras it directly jumps. So technically this is Manduka Pluti, but Siddhanta Kaumudi and Kashika both will say Panchani Grahanam Anuvartate. In fact, I want to show you this commentary over there, 2, 3, 32, I think, right? So 2, which sutra is there? 2, 3, 32. Prithagvina. See this, Kashika says Panchami Grahanam Anuvartate. Siddhanta Kaumudi also says Panchami Dvitiye Anuvartate. So Anuvrutti. And I think one commentary, Praudha Manorama, he says Tatra Manduka Plutya Panchami. So sometimes commentary will use Manduka Pluti, sometimes commentary will use Anuvrutti. The words are used interchangeably. Interchangeably in the sense, if it is sequential, then you don't say Manduka Pluti. You always say Anuvrutti. But when it has skipped a few sutras, you can be a little bit lenient and you can use the word anuvrutti when actually it means mandukaplati. Now there is another way in which the words are used. So as we mentioned, words are carried to the sutras later, either in the sequential order or by jumping. There are very few cases, only handful of cases, where the words are carried in the reverse way. So a word from the sutram X is used in the sutram X minus 1, the previous sutram. This reverse direction is called apakarshaha. So keshuchit sthaleshu, so keshuchit literally handful, less than 10, 20 across the entire sutra patha. So keshuchit sthaleshu सूत्रे विद्यमानः कश्चन शब्दः अनुवृत्तिरूपेण पूर्वसूत्रे स्वीकृतः अस्ति. एतादृशी विरुद्ध दिशि कृता अनुवृत्तिः अपकर्षः नाम्ना ज्ञायते. So there is this sutram vaha cha chandasi. Some of you might remember this from one of the homeworks. So in this vaha cha chandasi sutram, there is a va word present which is taken in the previous sutram kimot as apakarsha. So we say apakrishyate. Remember 2 slides ago, the word we used over here for that particular type of adhikara is anukrishyate. That's different. What we are studying right now is apakrishyate. So apakarshaha. Apa means previous in this particular context. So apakrishaha. Yet another example. There is a sutram called Bhuvo Bhave 31107. The bhava word is reverse taken in 31106 in Vadasupikyaksha. And there is a substantial reason to believe that Panini did not bring up the concept of apakarsha. So Anuvrutti and Mandukapliti are designed by Panini Maharshi. But apakarsha is not designed by Panini Maharshi. It is added by the Bhashyakara for handling some specific cases which were not possible to handle without that apakarsha in the Sutra Patha as it is. So भाष्यकारेण वार्तिककारेण अन्यैः व्याख्यातृभिः इष्टप्रयोगसिद्ध्यर्थम् अपकर्षस्य आयोजनं योजनं कृतं वर्तते. So here we end this discussion on Alpaksharatvam, and I have concluded this particular class with Anuvritti, Manduka, Pluti, Apakarsha, because that's the theme that we are going to carry in the next week's class. So let me just introduce you, show you the tip of the iceberg, and the whole iceberg will be discussed in the next class. So how do you actually interpret a sutram? The $1,000,000 question. Given a random sutram, how do you actually interpret it? So sutranam arthavagamanaस्य prathamam sopanam, the very first step is to collect all the adhikaras, anuvrittis, manduka plutis, apakarshas in that particular sutram to make it a full sutram, and then only some meaning can be understood. So just like the way in our example, only saying Yajnadatta as well has no meaning. You bring the words like Yajnadatta as well should go to the library. Bring those words from the previous sutram, and then some meaning will be generated. There is a lot more to it. In fact, the next class, class number 19, the entire class is for Sutranam Arthanishpattihi, Sutranam Arthaniranayaha, Sutranam Arthavagamanam. The very first step, the tip of the iceberg is this. You start the process by bringing in adhikaras, anuvrittis, and mandukaplutis. So, for example, Prithagvinananabhistritiyanyatarasyaam, check what adhikara is there. This sutram is in the anabhihite adhikara. Some of you might have heard of this while doing the homework. Then there is another anuvritti of dvitiya that comes from enapa dvitiya. Then there is an manduka pluti of panchami that comes from apadane panchami. There is no apakarsha. So you combine adhikara anuvritti manduka pluti apakarsha sahitam sutram पृथग्विना नानाभिस्तृतीयान्यतरस्यां द्वितीया पंचमी अनभिहिते. This is the full sutram, and this is the one that we have to interpret. How to interpret this is going to be discussed in the next week. So samapayamaha. Vidya Bhagini, you have a question, you can ask now. Sorry, I kept you waiting for quite long.
चिन्तामस्मि धन्यवादः महोदय कौमुद्यां कथं भवति महोदय न धातुलोपे अर्धधातुके नीति च दीति वेवीटाम् इति क्रमेण आगच्छति वा न कथं
तादृशं क्रमेण आगच्छति इति आवश्यकं नास्ति किमर्थमिति चेत् कौमुद्यां कौमुदिक्रमेण अनुवृत्तिः न स्वीक्रियते प्रत्येकं सूत्रस्य का अनुवृत्तिः इति कौमुदिकारः स्पष्टरूपेण वदति किल सो न स्तः इति स्पष्टरूपेण तेन उक्तमस्ति
अस्तु धन्यवादः
Any further questions? So every time I say the class will be small, keep on talking and lots of things get discussed. So I think a particular topic or subject is seen in one place together by chronological sutras. So that's the adhikara, first step of adhikara. We discussed that particular point. Chakara is the marker for anuvritti and adhikara. I think I addressed this, that you can consider as a marker for anuvritti, but it's the third step of adhikara that Bhashyakara has discussed. Chandramouli Mahoday. Chandramouli Mahoday, you can talk. Okay, probably not audible. You can type the message if you are not able to talk. Till
Can you hear me now?
Now I can hear you. Yeah.
See, the Sutram Vibhasha Kringi occurs twice. Correct? It occurs in 1498 as well as 1472.
Okay.
My point is, where is Alpaksharatam here?
Oh no, Vibhasha Krui appears in two different places because it has completely different meanings. There is no Alpaksharatam because the context is not shared at all. So in that way, you just see this Va Chandasi or some Chandasi, this Chandasi Netarasam or what? There is Chandasi Cha. Look at this Sutam, Chandasi Cha, Chandasi Cha, Chandasi Cha, Chandasi Cha. There is one thing that appears 20 times, I think. I keep on forgetting. Vibhasha Chandasi. Let's take this. Vibhasha Chandasi. No. Bahulam Chandasi. Look at this. Bahulam Chandasi, Bahulam Chandasi, Bahulam Chandasi, Bahulam. So different parts which are completely not connected are being repeated like this. So, I mean, you can say that he might have pulled all of them together, but then he might have required compromising at some other place. So it's eventually a call that he has to take at some point in time.
Oh, okay. Because in several places, we are actually trying to argue for what half a matra, laghavam and all.
Correct. So in most of the cases, we are trying to argue for half a matra, laghava and so on. And then he was also human. So maybe some, things I've missed out here and there. Bhashyakara has corrected them. But I don't think there is a discussion in the Bhashya about combining these, because what happens is it's like a software design. You do some trade-offs to achieve something. And then the question is always like, if you would not have done those trade-offs, maybe you would have achieved something else, but then there would have problem might have occurred at some other place.
Possibly,
So essentially you have to look at the overall system and take a call. So that's what he has done. Any further questions? Bahulam Chandasi is very interesting. So many occurrences, some 20 sutras, I think, or 10, 15 sutras this sutra is there. Bahulam Chandasi. Okay, homework. So simple homework. अधोदत्ताः विषयाः अल्पाक्षरत्वार्थं कथं प्रयुज्यन्ते इति सोदाहरण स्पष्टीकृत अनुवृत्ति अधिकार अनुबंध प्रत्ययलाघवं प्रत्याहारः. I have explicitly not given a question on the 3 interpretations of adhikara. It's somewhat advanced topic. It's okay if you have not understood it. It's actually not okay. Try to understand, but it's okay if you don't want to write it in the homework. I mean, so I have not written it over here. And then ekavakyena uttarata, again some simple exercises where you have to play around with the sutra patha. This second question is always given so that you become more familiar with the sutras in general. So for example, in today's class, those of you who are doing homeworks on time already know the sutram called anabhihite, or already know the sutram called vaha cha chandasi. So this is a reason that become familiar with the sutras more and more, and that's the reason why homework should be done on time, or in fact they should be done. So again, this will require you some amount of investigation in the sutra patha. Chandramouli Mahadevan, are you still having any? Okay, no questions. Okay. Okay, so there are no questions. Samapayamaha. So we are on 18th class. Next week we will have two classes, 19, 20, and then we will finish this particular second module. After the 20th class, we have a choice of directly starting the third module, 21st class. But at least the current plan is to keep 1 week free purely for clearing the doubts and for giving you a walkthrough of various features of the website. So on one day, we will go through various features of the website in an interactive manner. I don't want to be, a monotonous dialogue over here. So we'll go through various features of the website, and then whatever doubts you have across all these 20 classes so far, please collect them or send them to me. If you send them to me, I will be able to prepare a presentation, add more content to it, and then present it. Or if you want to ask questions on the fly, that's also possible. If there are no questions, we can just take one small break, and then from the week after that, we can start with class number 21. That's the place where we actually enter the study of Ashtadhyayi Sutras. So Samnya Paribhasham, Samnya Prakaranam is what we will start from class number 21. Samapayamaha. अष्टाध्यायी जगन्माता यस्य चित्तात् समुत्थिता वेदानाम् उपकाराय तस्मै पाणिनिये नमः. शब्द ब्रह्म समाराध्य कृतवान्यो विलक्षणं सर्वाश्चर्यमिदं शास्त्रं तस्मै पाणिनिये नमः. येन धौता गिरः पुंसां विमलैः शब्दवारिभिः तमश्चाज्ञानजं भिन्नं तस्मै पाणिनिये नमः. धन्यवादः.